Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for your next PB&J card class. In today's video, we'll be making this card here featuring our brushstroke stamps and some masking to create a little garden full of daisies. So the stamps that I'm using is our new Dancing Daisies slapstick cling stamp, and I'll also be using our So Lucky stamp. That's a miniature transparent set, and also the Sprigs transparent set. And I will have a full supply list at the end of the video, and that will list all of the stamp numbers and names, as well as the ink colors and everything else that I'm using to create today's card. So to begin, I'm working on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper, and this is a 5x7 card, so it's a nice big card to stamp a bunch of daisies on. And I am inking up our transparent set, the sentiment All Things Great, and I'm stamping this using Ranger Archival ink in the color of Potting Soil, and this is a nice rich dark brown. I am doing multiple impressions here using my Misty stamp positioning tool, and that's just because that is a really textured watercolor paper, and by stamping it multiple times that helps me to get a nice crisp impression on all of the letters and words. Now I'm working on the Dancing Daisies stamp, and I'm using my Tombow dual brush markers, and I apologize, it's kind of turned to the side here. I wanted you to be able to see how I was inking the stamp and then also after it's stamped, and this was sort of the best position I could think of when I was recording. And I'm coloring with the brush tip of the Tombow dual brush pen, and I'm starting by just working one daisy at a time. I kind of turn the brush tip to the side, and that helps me color a larger area quicker. And then I'm stamping that down while it's still wet. Now, if you are doing this without a stamp positioning tool, it certainly can be done. You would just want to put your stamp on your acrylic block, color in the entire image, so the petals, the center of the flowers, the leaves, and then I would recommend just lightly misting it or holding the stamp up to your mouth and huffing or breathing on it to reactivate and re-wet those inks that are on the stamp. But by using the Misty tool, I can just go a little bit by bit, and stamp them right away while the ink is still wet, so I don't need to do any misting. And these markers are water-soluble markers, so I'll be able to go back and add blending and with water after everything is stamped. So you could also try this with any of your other water-soluble markers. I get asked a lot, could you do this with distress markers? You certainly can. I really like the Tombows because I find that the color is very rich and bold and vibrant. So that's what I typically choose when I'm doing this technique. So I stamped all of those, but I didn't do the blending yet, and now I'm just adding some extra stamping in the background. So I cut a mask on typing paper of just the leaves and the stems here down at the bottom, and then I covered up that portion of the daisy stamp, and it was kind of moving on me, so I just taped it there with some painter's tape. And now I'm inking this Sprig stamp with Majestic Blue VersaFine ink, and this is a waterproof ink, so I can do my painting in my background right on top of that, and it's not going to bleed or blend. And I love how once you reveal the masked areas, how those flowers look like they're behind the daisies. So now I'm ready to just blend what I've already stamped. And now this stamp could look a little intimidating with all these little petals down here, but really do not worry about that. I don't even worry about them blending into each other. I just want to give that a really pretty watercolor look, and your eye naturally just starts to see the individual petals just by the way that it's illustrated. And we'll also go back in and add a few more details with colored pencil once we've blended everything and the ink has had time to dry. So I just work section by section here, and I'm just basically painting with just water in my brush, just kind of smoothing that out and activating that stamped area. Now once that's dry, I'm going in with Prismacolor pencils, and like I said, all of the ink colors and marker colors and colored pencil names and everything will be listed at the end of the video. I'm starting with just a red here, and I added a touch up at the top of the petals and just the tiniest little bit at the bottom. This is kind of a terracotta color. I'm just lightly adding that on top. And then I'll take a yellow and just sort of blend those into the yellow that was already stamped and painted with the water. Now I'll add a brown just to add some shadow here up at the top, and just pull a little bit of that brown down onto the petals. And like I said, you don't have to worry about getting it exactly as it's illustrated, just make a few lines coming down and your eye will just automatically start to see the individual petals there. I will use the green on the stem and the leaves. And I'm just going to use 2 colors of green. I really love this bright green mixed with that darker green. And then on top of the flowers that we stamped here, the sprigs, I'm just coloring with the light blue. And the Prismacolor pencils are pretty opaque. They have a real waxy finish. And so it's nice you can put a lighter blue over the darker blue that was stamped. And I'm just using a little bit of a dark brown here on these stems and leaves. And before we go to the next step, here's just a closer look at that shading on those flowers. And now we'll move on to working on our background. So to paint the background, I'm going to use Distress Reinkers used as watercolor. So I just need just a dab onto an acrylic block or just a non-porous surface to use as a palette. The colors I'm using are Gathered Twigs and Peeled Paint. And first I put some water down onto my background. So this is just plain water. And this just buys me some time once I add the ink to the background to blend it around. It also dilutes some of that color so it's not quite as bold. I just really love the way the Gathered Twigs gives it like the look of almost old book paper or a vintage look. So that's why I reached for this. You could also paint this with watercolors or even just add distress inks using an ink blending tool and a foam pad. But by painting it in, I can get right up next to those flowers and some of those petals and the leaves and stems, which would be difficult to do with an ink blending tool and a foam pad. I want to be careful not to sort of touch the area that I've stamped with my brush or the water because it will bleed. It did just a little bit there. You can fix it a little if you pick it up with your brush right away. It's pretty forgiving, but you just want to use care when you're painting that background. I've sped this video up, so I certainly was not painting that fast in real life or when I was recording. And I'm just pulling that down and getting lighter as I move towards the bottom. And here now I'm adding that peeled paint watercolor and diluting it and blending it with water. As it moves up towards the sky, I just use more and more water and less of the ink. And here's where it is handy to have stamped those second flowers, those ones with all the little petals, those blue ones, with a waterproof ink because it's a nice dark color and it's waterproof, so I could just paint right over those when I was doing the background. I'm adding a few splatters up at the top just for some added visual interest. And they're very light. I hardly have anything on the paintbrush. I just dabbed it up so they weren't too dark, so I put a paper towel on top and just very carefully dabbed that up. And here's a look at that. Just very subtle texture. I'm adding some ink down at the bottom using an ink blending tool and a foam pad, and I'm just using Ranger Archival ink in the color of Fern Green. And I chose that particular ink just because I like the color. And now I'm using Distress ink in the color of Gathered Twigs and just going all the way around the card. It's a very light layer, but it just kind of finishes things off and adds to that vintage look. Now I just had to add some more stamping. So I am using, this is the really like the handiest background stamp, this grass, and this is from the So Lucky set. And I'm just stamping that using VersaFine ink in the color of Olympia Green, which is just a nice dark green that goes over the top of all the other stamping and background painting that I had already done. And I didn't add it all the way across, but just in a few places. And for me, I felt like that really finished off the bottom of the card. And there is the finished card. This is a 1-layer card, and I would just mount this watercolor panel to a 5x7 note card. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, and on our website, and I will have all of those linked in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned, here at the very end of the video will be that supply list that I mentioned earlier.